floor under this economy. We have to help the families that can be helped, and this FHA Refinance Program Termination Act would prevent that from happening. I thank the ranking member for the time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Doe.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. And Mr. Chairman, H.R. 830 is common sense legislation that stops inefficient and ineffective government spending. This program, at its outset of this $8 billion program, its failure was inevitable. That inevitable failure is now undeniable. It doesn't work for the homeowner. It doesn't work for the tax-paying American families. And it certainly doesn't work for future generations who are trying to claw their way out of the debt that we are burdening them with each and every day. So let's go back and let's talk about the homeowners. We've got 12 million mortgages in America that are currently underwater. And yet this program, which was actually rolled out in March, started about 6 months ago, has 245 applications. 245. How many have actually made it over the hurdles and have gotten actually some help and refinanced? 44. 44 refinances. We've got $8.12 billion that has been obligated. We have $50 million that has been dispersed. Now, a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, that's $1.1 million per mortgage refinanced thus far. If we look at it even further, were these million-dollar mortgages? Actually, the average mortgage was about $300,000. So we spent, the American taxpayers, in terms of their dollars, we spent $1.1 million in order to refinance a $300,000 loan. The administration said we're going to have 1.5 million homeowners get into this program. And yet we've taken almost a year. We have 44 that have actually gone through. If you were to get through this program, if you were one of the lucky ones, one of the 44, clearly it's not going to help you in so as you're going to destroy your credit for the next several years. The average credit score of the 44 that are in the program was 711. That credit score is going to go down. Is their monthly payment going to go down? In many instances, no. Because they're going to have to come up with closing costs. They're going to have to pay private mortgage insurance if they haven't been paying it already. And so there are other requirements that are simply a burden on the actual homeowners. It's time that we tell the American public the truth. It's time that we in this body recognize when a government program is not working. We need to get rid of this program. $8.12 billion obligated, $50 million dispersed for 245 applicants and 44 mortgages actually redone. The program certainly doesn't work for the American taxpayer. When we're looking at debts and deficits in Washington, many of us sent here to Washington to try to get the out-of-control government spending back in line. And I would say that certainly 1.1 million per mortgage is not a good use of the taxpayer dollars. When we look at future generations, we look at the amount of money that we're spending right now. $1.48 trillion in the deficit spending. Works out to be over $3 million a minute. The President's budget comes out, it's talking about 1.6 for the next year. We cannot continue to spend money that we don't have. Our debt at $14 trillion. When we actually took a look at the Treasury report that came out just a couple of days ago talking about TARP, because this program is basically on TARP funds, they recognize that the mortgage modification programs were never intended to be recovered. This, to me, I think is an enormous problem. This is a program that doesn't work for the homeowner. It doesn't work for the American public, and it certainly is not going to work for future generations. I yield back.
From Massachusetts.
I yield myself 30 seconds simply to say the gentleman simply repeated an absolute fantasy. This is not a $50 million expenditure for 40 loans. The $50 million has not been given to anybody, not a penny of it. It has been put in a reserve account. $50 million has been set aside in a reserve account. It was dispersed from the TARP to a reserve account. The CBO has estimated that if this goes forward, it'll be about $12,000 per loan. Last week, the gentleman from Illinois was claiming that if you participate in this program, you'd have a tax liability. He learned that that was totally wrong. He's perpetuating error.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I'm proud to represent much of the San Joaquin County, which is the jewel of California's Central Valley. Our valley is a great place to live and work, but unfortunately, we've been hit very hard by the economic downturn. The valley has been ground zero for the foreclosure crisis. Over the past few years, thousands of families in San Joaquin County and throughout the valley have lost their homes. I've hosted foreclosure assistance workshops. I've met with hardworking people who were misled by lenders who are struggling to stay on top of their mortgages. I've seen grown men cry because they couldn't keep a roof over their children. I've talked to veterans who served their country only to return home to notices of default. And I've met seniors on the brink of homelessness. The administration's foreclosure prevention initiatives have fallen short in the valley. Simply put, the administration's programs haven't effectively served the people underwater on their mortgage, and the administration hasn't been tough enough on the big banks. I call on President Obama and his cabinet to develop more effective efforts to stem the tide of foreclosures. But despite these shortcomings, the bill the House Republicans are offering today is absolutely the wrong approach. It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Instead of canceling foreclosure relief programs at their beginning stages like they're proposing, we should be strengthening them so they're more effective. Mortgage counselors from my district advise and plead to improve our efforts to get tough on big banks and provide meaningful relief to families. Stabilizing the housing market is critical to economic recovery and creating jobs. For these reasons, I oppose H.R. 830, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Alabama.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I yield the gentleman from Illinois 30 seconds.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 30 seconds.
I thank the chair. Running a business, I have to tell you, obligated funds are one thing, dispersed funds are quite another. And if I can, from the monthly 50A report delivered to the Congress from TARP and from the Department of the Treasury, and I have and would like to submit for the record, under obligated, all the way down here, when it's talking about the FHA refinance, it's $8.12 billion. In an entirely different column, under dispersed, it's $50 million. From the paper here, from the Department of the Treasury, obligated and dispersed are different things. We got $50 million that has been dispersed. I yield back.
I yield myself 15 seconds to further elucidate matters. The gentleman from Illinois. It has been dispersed in a letter of credit, none of which has been drawn down. It sits there as a reserve in case of losses. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Gentlelady from New York recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the ranking member for yielding, and I rise in opposition to H.R. 830, and this bill is one of 4 separate anti-foreclosure programs aimed at helping troubled homeowners stay in their homes that the new House Republican majority are planning to end. Now, what is very troubling is they don't have any idea of what to put in its place. Now, we know that we have 12 million mortgages that are underwater that need help, and they're in all of our states, but they're not coming forward with any ideas of how to help the economy or to help the people. Now, this particular program is just getting started. It's the FHA Short Refinance Program, and it's one of the foreclosure prevention programs that would not only help the individual homeowners, but also help to stabilize the overall U.S. housing market, which is 25% of our economy. So it not only helps an individual, it helps a locality, it helps our country, it helps our economic strength. The result of ending this program would be hundreds of thousands of additional foreclosures and steeper price declines in our housing. It's outrageous. It's short-sighted, it's mean, and it's wrong. Now in this program, it would allow the borrowers to reduce the principal owed on their homes up to 10% so that their payments are lower, so that they can save money that they can't afford. And in return, the banks would get an FHA-insured loan that is subject to all of FHA's strict standards. So to get this loan, you're going to have to jump through hoops to be able to qualify, and it is voluntary. Just last week, several major banks in America voluntarily walked forward to help out. Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, to name a few. So the program is just getting started, and the $50 million line of credit is like a line of credit you draw down on. Hopefully we won't even have to tap into it. Hopefully our economy improves, people are employed, and they're able to pay their mortgages. And the standards are very, very strict. The owners must be current on their payments. It must be their primary residence. They have to have full documentation to qualify. So it is a strict program, and I want to come back to an issue that is very important to me, is that this affects lives. This affects people. Now, in Congressman Frank's home state, there are over 222,000 residents whose mortgages are underwater that could qualify possibly if they can meet the criteria. It's part of a total package to help our economy move forward. And the opposition, the Republican majority, has no ideas of their own. It's just to come in and cut a good program that is just getting started. Now, they mentioned the 44 people that have been helped. They say that's not important. I would say it's very important to the 44 people that have been helped. And there may be 12 million, possibly, that could be helped under this program.
From Alabama.
I inquire of the chair as to the time remaining on each side.
The gentleman from Alabama has 6.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Massachusetts has 7.25 minutes remaining.
I'll continue to reserve my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I yield to one of the leading House experts on this matter, the gentleman from North Carolina, 4 minutes.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to reassure Americans that it is not true that no problem ever gets fixed in Washington. 10 years ago, the debate here in Congress was what to do with the surplus. In fact, we paid off $400 billion of the debt, and Alan Greenspan, who was then the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, worried that we were going to pay off the national debt too quickly and it might be unsettling to the economy. Mr. Chairman, if there is one problem that got solved in the last decade, it is that problem, the problem of paying off the national debt too quickly. And my party can claim none of the credit for that. It was a Republican president, it was a Republican Congress. And I must admit, I don't like what they did to solve that problem of paying off the national debt too quickly. They gave tax cuts to Americans, the top 1/10 of 1%, Americans making more than $2 million, $340,000. And we saw just a couple of months ago that that was one thing that was absolutely non-negotiable for them. They would give up everything before they would let those Americans have to pay any more in taxes. When there was a proposal to expand Medicare to take care of prescription drugs, something that I supported generally, Republicans in Congress passed a bill that was not paid for, as other programs like that had been paid for, and was a giveaway to the insurance industry and to the prescription drug industry. So when they're giving tax cuts to the very, very richest Americans, the richest of the rich, when they're giving away taxpayer money to the insurance industry and to the prescription drug industry, the drug industry, they don't worry about deficits at all. It's only when Democrats take the presidency, and particularly in the last 2 years, when we have been dealing with the worst recession since the Great Depression and been trying to pull the country out of a nosedive, that they have suddenly become worried about the deficits, and criticize Americans, everything that we have done to try to save the country from the disaster that we inherited. And it is only the programs that help working and middle-class families that seem to give them a problem like this one. Now, we have been on the case of subprime lending and its effects for a long time. I introduced legislation in 2004 to rein in subprime lending. Not a bit of help from Republicans. Mr. Watt and I introduced that bill. It was Miller-Watt. 2 years later, it became Miller-Watt-Frank. We have been on this case. In 2007, I introduced a bill to the gentleman from Alabama said in committee the other day, show me a way to deal with this problem that doesn't cost taxpayer money. I did that in 2007. I introduced a bill that bankruptcy lawyers and judges had said was one way to deal with the problem, is that let bankruptcy judges modify mortgages in bankruptcy the same way they modify all other kinds of secured debt. No support from Republicans at all, and the opposition Republicans killed that. I have introduced, or I've urged the federal agencies that set rules for the banks to require they treat people better than they've been treating them when they manage their mortgages. No help from Republicans at all. And even in the last, well, just yesterday, the federal agencies in charge of the bank's conduct and the state's attorney generals have been pushing the banks, to impose fines for violating the law in how they handle foreclosures. And several Republicans sent a letter yesterday to the Secretary of the Treasury protesting that federal agencies were being too mean to the banks. Now, I thought most politicians learned during the Keating Five that your office does not give you the right to give your political buddies, your contributors, a get-out-of-jail-free card. But that appears to be what they're willing to do when it's the banking industry that is complaining about it. It is not true that this problem of foreclosure is just affecting a handful of Americans. Can I have another minute?
1 minute.
Nice for one additional minute.
We are in a cycle of foreclosures leading to reduced value of homes, reduced values of home, more Americans underwater, and when people are underwater, they've seen their life savings disappear. More Americans underwater, more foreclosures, and on and on. We have got to put a bottom on the housing market. We know this can work. This program is very similar to a program in the New Deal that did work. The Homeowners Loan Corporation turned a profit, a slight profit, but a profit, and saved the middle class, save the housing industry. We need to do something. Republicans have offered nothing. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I yield 1 minute and 15 seconds to the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Hack.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you, my thanks to the gentleman from Alabama for the time. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to oppose H.R. 830, the FHA Refinance Program Termination Act. I represent the district that is truly ground zero for America's housing crisis. 390,192 mortgages in Nevada are underwater. Let me say that again. 390,192 families in Nevada are underwater. I agree that people need a paycheck, not a government check. But we must help individuals who are trying to do the right thing. This program gives some of those Nevadans who are current on their mortgage but underwater the ability to refinance their loan. Some will say this program is a failure because too few mortgages have been refinanced through it. They'll say not enough money has been distributed. I say a failed PR job should not be the reason a good program dies. And the FHA refinance program can be a good program. But it needs more attention and perhaps reform, so homeowners know it's an option. Vote no on H.R. 830 and give homeowners a chance to take advantage of this program. And I yield back my time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama.
At this time, Mr. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Yoder, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 830. Bill would repeal a well-intentioned but bankrupt policy. Mr. Chairman, the American people are tired of bailout after bailout and big spending bill after big spending bill. With $14 trillion in debt and borrowing $5 billion a day, yet unemployment's 9%. The American people are sending us an unmistakable message. The idea of borrowing, bailing out and spending isn't working. We're borrowing more money in Washington with this program that we don't have to help Americans borrow more money at home that they can't afford for housing they can't afford. Mr. Chairman, this is madness. When will this stop, and when will the politicians in Washington understand that we're not going to be able to borrow and spend our way to prosperity? The American people are tired of this. They want Washington leaders to step up, reduce spending, and eliminate programs that aren't working. Mr. Chairman, I ask today that we pass this legislation and restore fiscal sanity to Washington. I yield
Gentleman's
back.
time has expired. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Massachusetts?
How much time is remaining on both sides, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has 2.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Alabama has about 4.25 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Alabama has the right to close.
Thank you. Mr. Chair,
I have
will
only
you
one
reserve the
remaining-
balance of your time?
I have only one remaining speaker, so I'll defer until you have your last speaker.
You just have one remaining speaker?
Yes.
At this time, I recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Biggert, for 2.5 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And, Mr. Chairman, President Ronald Reagan famously said, with tongue-in-cheek, no doubt, that the closest thing to eternal life on this earth is a federal government program. And I rise today in support of H.R. 830, legislation offered by my friend from Illinois, Mr. Dold. At the risk of disproving the late President's axiom, let me just say that H.R. 830 will demonstrate that Congress does have the good sense, the fortitude, and the wherewithal to bring an end to a federal program, especially one that's not working. The program in question is the FHA refinancing program, which was authorized under the broadest of provisions in the TARP legislation back in 2008. In 2010, the program was conceived in haste, enacted with no vote in Congress, and was designed to augment another failed program, the Making Homes Affordable program, or HAMP, which has done more harm than good. Under the FHA refinancing program, the FHA is directed to use TARP funds to refinance mortgages that are current but underwater. Its record has been a real problem, with FHA commissioners stating during our hearing last month, and I quote, "As of February 11th, 44 loans have been endorsed," end quote. Where else but in Washington would it be a good idea to obligate $8 billion in taxpayer funds and disperse $50 billion of those dollars? Now, whether it's to help 44 homeowners or not, we don't know how many will be in default, how many, what it will cost. But that money has been dispersed from the U.S. Treasury. Mr. Chairman, this bill ends another failed government program. Taxpayers shouldn't foot the bill for failure. So I would urge my colleagues to support the bill and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself my remaining time. A week ago, when we debated this in committee, the author of the bill, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dold, was telling people that if they joined this program, they'd have a tax liability. He was wrong. It wasn't his fault. He was told that that was the case. He dutifully read what he was told. You haven't heard that again because he found out that was wrong. He was also told that it was going to be $50 million dispersed. They don't seem to be clear on what that means. No, $50 million has not been spent on any individual. $50 million has been set aside in a letter of credit, if necessary in the future, to pay for defaults. So this $1 million loan is, of course, a fantasy. Now, it is true. The program has not yet had a major impact. And if it does not prove itself out, it never will. It cannot be both wildly expensive and non-existent. It is there if we get an agreement involving all the attorneys general of both parties, involving the regulators and the financial institutions. This will be one of the tools that will accommodate people. CBO does think there could be a loss. Their prediction is, their best guess, and they're the best objective element we have, you could get an amount of $12,000 or so per loan lost here. Not $1 million, $12,000. It is part of a panoply of projects to try and reduce foreclosures and help the economy deal with this crisis. And for people who, and I repeat it, they don't like it, they'll send money to Brazil, they'll send money to Afghan cities, they'll send money to Iraqi securities, they'll subsidize farmers at more than $250,000 a year, but $12,000 per homeowner at most is too much for them. And it isn't just for the homeowners. It is a necessary part of getting out of our economic crisis. So I hope that this is defeated. I appreciated what the gentleman from Nevada said. Yes, it can be improved. The fact that only 44 people have been involved so far means they are proceeding appropriately cautiously. This is a program with great promise. It may not turn out, but if the promise doesn't turn out, then it doesn't cost anything. And if it does turn out to be a workable part of an overall solution, it will be money much better spent than many of the billions my colleagues on the other side are prepared to subsidize some of their favored sacred cows as opposed to doing something that will help the whole economy. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Chair, I will approach the floor to use my remaining time.
The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of this body, what are we talking about when we're talking about cutting government spending? We're talking about these children. These children cannot afford a future where its federal government spends $8 billion more every day than it takes in. Now, the chairman has criticized our military spending. I could have a picture of my children or grandchildren up, and I could have a picture of one of my little granddaughters whose son served in the U.S. Marines. Their unit served in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So I make no apology for supporting our troops. Now, if the President decides to call them home, my son would support that. Now, the chairman, the ranking member Frank says, well, this sits in a fund. This program that's helped 44 families whose average mortgage was $330,000. That's more than the cost of a home in my district. But here is the President Obama's report to us that $50 million has been dispersed. But the alarming figure is $8.112 billion that's obligated. Now, the gentlelady from New York said that the banks, Citibank, Bank of America, they're all lining up to use this program. I would be too. This transfers obligations from lenders to the taxpayer. As long as these mortgages were making money, the banks profited. But all of a sudden, when they're underwater and a borrower maybe can't make the payment, hey, if I was a bank, I'd say, yeah, let the government, let the taxpayers reduce this mortgage. That ought to be between the bank and the homeowners. 42 families. You say all these 4 programs we're going to debate this week and next week, which cost billions of dollars, they're going to help 500,000 families. There are 12 million families that are underwater. Let's talk about something very important. If we don't get our financial house in order, I'll quote the words of Admiral Mike Mullen on August 25th before CNN, and I'll close with this. The most significant threat to our national security is our debt. And that threat comes from this body and the administration. It's time to cut spending. Think about them. Think about their future.
From Alabama has expired. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute printed in the bill should be considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute is in order except for those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in a daily issue dated March 9, 2011 or earlier, and accept pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the member who causes it to be printed or a designee and shall be considered read if printed. The clerk will designate Section 1.
Be it enacted. Section
Speaker.
1, short title.
Are there any amendments to Section 1?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment
Chairman,
at the
I
desk.
make a point of
From
order
Alabama.
against the amendment.
Does the gentleman from Alabama have an amendment to Section 1?
No. I make a point of order against the amendment that...
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent that the reading be dispensed with.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Okay, I ask unanimous consent that the reading be dispensed with. Okay.
The amendment has been designated. Gentleman from Alabama.
I make a point of order against the amendment because, in my opinion, I reserve a point of order against the amendment because, in my opinion, it violates... All right.
Point of order is reserved.
My point of order.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes in support of her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my amendment has the purpose of making very clear what we're doing today to the American people. And this amendment ensures that we do that. It shows that and makes clear that we are ending a program that has the potential to help hundreds of thousands of underwater borrowers. H.R. 830, the FHA Refinance Program Termination Program, ignores the underwater borrowers of this country and does nothing to help families save their homes. Very simply, the bill ends a program that has the potential to help hundreds of thousands of people whose mortgages now exceed the value of their homes, and also help the communities and help the overall economy. The majority crafted a so-called open rule in such a way that it's nearly impossible to offer any substantive amendments. A number were voted down on party lines in the committee debates. In response to this reality and an effort to highlight the true nature of this harmful bill, my amendment identifies the numbers in each state of the hundreds of thousands of underwater borrowers across the country and makes clear that the Republican majority has no solution to the problem, nor do they have any desire to find one. Americans must be made aware of the intention of this majority. This program allows borrowers to write down at least 10% to reduce the debt burden. They are all paying. They are in financial difficulty, and banks then can get an insured FHA guarantee and move forward and keep living in their homes and can keep participating in the economy. Because of this vote today, if the majority wins, homeowners across the country may not have the opportunity to take advantage of the program that just began and which should be made, in my opinion, available to them. Now what this does, it goes down all of the impacts across the country. It shows that in my home state of New York, there are over 129,000 mortgages underwater that would not be able to apply for this program to allow people to stay in their homes. In Chairman Baucus's state, there are over 35,000 mortgages underwater. In Florida, there are more than 2 million mortgages underwater, and they have no alternative of any way to help these people. And these numbers are from an independent company study. If you go to California, our largest state, over 2 million homes are underwater. Nevada, 390,000 individuals are facing the loss of their homes. In Arizona, there are over 648,000 families that are underwater. Their home is not worth what they're paying for it, what the mortgage is. So this program is one that I think is thoughtful, one that has only $50 million as sort of a line of credit that will be pulled down if there are defaults. But the banks participating have very strict standards, as does the FHA. They have to be their primary residence. They have to provide full documentation. No more of these no-doc loans. It must be current on the mortgage. They must have a job. They have to have many, many levels that they have to meet before they get the loan. But at least it's a lifeline to these 12 million families whose homes are underwater. And with declining home values, borrowers are caught in mortgages they no longer can afford because their rates have reset or because their interest-only payments have not allowed them to grow any equity in their homes. They are making their payments, but just barely. And so this one is there to help them. And it simply adds findings to the bill with the number of underwater mortgages in each state that we've secured the data for, so that it becomes very clear to the American people how many homeowners in each state we are not helping if we do what the majority wants to terminate this program. And I might say this program is one of 4 that the Obama administration has put forward to help homeowners stay in their homes and to help stabilize our economy, which is still fragile and is still recovering. Housing is 25% of our economy, according to many economists, so the strength of housing is important to the overall health of our nation's economic future. So I urge my colleagues to support the amendment to make it clear by the vote on this bill how many Americans across this country will not be helped if the majority gets their passage of their bill that would terminate a program that has the potential of helping literally millions in America. My time has expired. I urge a yes vote on my amendment.
Alabama.
Mr. Chairman, I now make a point of order against the amendment because, in my opinion, it violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the matter it is amending. It's not germane to the bill because it's outside the scope of the bill and fails to draw the nexus to the bill.
Other member wish to be heard on the point of order. The gentlelady from New York.
Yes. The amendment is germane, Mr. Speaker. This program has the potential to help underwater mortgages across our great country, which is germane to the bill we're debating today, because the program terminates the potential of this help. You have no findings in this bill that you're rushing to the floor. It is germane to talk about the hundreds of thousands of homeowners that are out there that possibly could lose their home because this program is being terminated. This is germane, in my opinion, to the underlying bill.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? Gentleman from Alabama.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, she lists the number of mortgages that are underwater, but there's no, and saying that this program may help them. Obviously, there are many of those. The borrowers are behind on their payments. They wouldn't qualify for help. Just the number 44 ought to tell you that when you list 12 million homeowners and then say that the termination of this program would have helped is quite a stretch. There are certain other qualifications under this legislation that are not met by simply being underwater.
Does the gentlelady wish to be heard on the point of order?
Yes, I do. As a point of information, there's very strict criteria from the FHA and from the individual banks that are voluntarily participating. And one of those criteria is that you must be current on your payments. You must be current. What the gentleman said was inaccurate, that they could be behind on their payments or not making their payments. They're having difficulty making it because their home value is not equal to what the mortgage is, and so it's difficult. But they must all be current on their payments.
Will the gentlelady...
And also, Mr. Speaker, it's very germane to list the people who potentially could be hurt by this.
The gentlelady needs to confine her remarks to the point of order. The gentleman from Alabama wish to be heard on the point of order.
No, sir.
Prepared to rule on the point of order.
Chairman, I would like to be heard on the point of order.
From Texas.
First of all, the gentleman from Alabama was arguing the merits of the legislation. These are findings that pertain to the results that would occur from the language in the bill. The bill is eliminating the existing funds or leftover funds for FHA refinance. The amendment clearly lays out the impacted persons connected to the elimination. Therefore, this is germane because it relates to the language of the amendment and the intent of the amendment. 12 million people left behind, thousands of homeowners in different states, and the fact that there is no other solution to these homeowners except FHA refinance. It is a germane amendment. The findings are simply laying out the impact. We do that in all of our bills to put findings on what the basis of legislation what the impact would be. So I ask the chairman to consider the gentlelady's amendment, being germane. Findings are germane, and it is doing simply that, of listing the elements of the impact of this legislation. With that, I yield back and ask for a waiver if anything else does not occur.
The Chair is prepared to rule on the point of order. The gentleman from Alabama makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from New York is not germane. The bill addresses repeal of a Federal Housing Administration program that provides for refinancing a specified set of mortgages. One of the fundamental principles of germaneness is that the amendment relate to the subject matter of the underlying bill. The bill is confined to a specific type of refinancing program. The amendment seeks, in fact, to address mortgages more generally beyond the confines of the subject addressed by the bill. The amendment is therefore not germane, and the point of order is sustained.
Like the last word.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm distressed with this ruling because I think it is germane that people will lose their homes, that they are eliminating a program that is just starting, that is thoughtful, that would give FHA financing and guarantees to help people stay in their homes, and that people in Nevada, over 390,000, could be affected by this. California, over 2 million people, homes are underwater. Florida, over 2 million homes are underwater. Arizona, 648. And in my own state, over 129,000 people will not have the access to this program that allows them to adjust their mortgages so that they reflect the true value of their homes, make their payments on that value so that they can move forward and be part of the community, keep these homes from becoming blight and emptied in an area. We all have stories in our districts and across the nation where people cannot make their mortgage payments because they have lost values in their home. They are deserting them. They are leaving them. In some states, they are literally bulldozing the homes underground because no one can afford to live in them. This is an answer to some of the challenges. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about the cost. Well, I would say that the cost, not only to the individual homeowner, but to the overall economy, will be greater by terminating the 4 efforts, the 4 anti-foreclosure efforts from the Obama administration to help with the housing crisis. And we know that the subprime crisis was a scandal. Many people got into homes they couldn't afford under misinformation. We have helped other areas of our economy. We certainly should help the homeowners, the working Americans, to help them through this economic crisis too. And we have to remember that although we are digging our way out of this Great Recession, the recovery has been slow. We are still in a fragile economy. Economists testified before the Financial Services Committee that housing was 25% of our economy. So helping people stay in their homes, I would say that our overall economy has a stake in it. Now, some people said, well, the banks will run in and do this. Banks are not going to do this unless they think that the loan is going to be paid and they're not going to be hurt with it. And the standards from FHA are very high. You have to be current. You have to have a job. You have to live in your home. You have to have proven track record. You have to have good credit and before you can be approved. So that is why only $50 million is the line of credit that will be drawn down if there are foreclosures. Hopefully, the economy improves, people keep their jobs. Hopefully, the banks do a good job and do not hand out loans unless people can actually repay them. And this will be a tool to move forward, not only to help people, but help the overall economy. Now, what I find troubling, very troubling about this, is that my friends on the other side of the aisle want to terminate 4 anti-foreclosure programs, but they have no alternative. It's sort of like their approach to jobs. They have not come forward with any program to help create jobs. They have not come forward with any program to help people stay in their homes. It's part of the so be it attitude. You're on your own. We're not going to help you. But this is a program that helps people help themselves adjust to the reality of what their homes are actually worth And I think that it's important that this information of how many people, the 12 million people, and where they live in America is important information that should be part of this bill. And that's why I am now respectfully requesting unanimous consent to place into the record the listing of where these 12 million people live, so people will know these are the people we are saying, no, so be it, we're not going to be there to help you. And let me tell you, my fellow colleagues, I would be cautious about voting for this, because you're voting against your economy, you're voting against your state, you are voting against your own colleagues, your own residents and neighbors who may need this. We know the trouble that's in this economy. Practically every family in America has some relative who's lost a job or is unemployed. So this is some way to help with this economic recovery. It is thoughtful, it is a good program, and I urge my colleagues to vote against the So Be It bill the Republicans have before us today, and to really work with, in a bipartisan way, the Obama administration to help working Americans, struggling Americans, stay in their home. It's the least that we can do as a caring nation. Absolutely the least we can do as a caring nation. And so I urge my colleagues, and I would be very cautious in your vote, because I believe your constituents are going to remember this vote if this program is terminated and their lifeline, their ability to stay in their homes is terminated because of your vote today. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady's request will be covered under general leave. The gentlelady from Texas.
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's recognized.
I'm very sorry that Congressman Maloney's amendment was subject to a point of order, and I'd like to simply add that you need to put faces on what this legislation is doing. It is a simple act. It guts and eliminates all remaining funding. It does say that if you're in the midst of the program, you might continue. But everyone knows how solid FHA is. Whenever you hear FHA, you know that there is a framework that really provides for protection for the federal government, and a fiscally responsible program that provides the federal government with protection for those who are able to utilize it. But even traveling through airports, Mr. Chairman, I had a man with a family who indicated that in the midst of the holiday season, even though he had been told by the banking institution that his mortgage was intact, they would allow him to continue to pay, he was keeping up but having difficulty looking for modification. A few days into the new year, January 6th, he was foreclosed on, and a few days later, or at least on that day, foreclosed with a sign or a notice on his door, vacate in 3 days. These are the faces of individuals who probably would have fared better under FHA. At the same time, a law enforcement, a police officer came to me and said the very same thing, naming an institution that I had never heard of, had no national standing, some fly-by-night. Here is a law enforcement officer, a local police officer, putting his life on the line every day. And he needed to sell his home, and he had managed to find a buyer. He had communicated that to the bank. But lo and behold, the low-life thing to do was what this financial institution did, and I would call it not a bank but probably a mortgage entity. They took the house right from underneath a man that goes out every day and projects himself into the community and could lay his life on the line. I'm against H.R. 830 and H.R. 836. It doesn't make sense when we've got hundreds of thousands of individuals who are in need of this program. I will venture to say that if a program needs fixing, have we ever heard of fix it, don't end it, mend it, don't end it? Of course it is always important to do due diligence and have oversight over these programs. But I would think that the Financial Services Committee, under our past chairman and now the ranking member, working with the chairman now, could come up with the genius to make FHA work better if that is the case. But the nonsensical plan of eliminating it, not helping the underwater mortgagors, the individuals, mortgagees, the individuals who have these mortgages, with homes that are distressed, with mortgages that are worth more than the homes, and we know there are many communities like this, and my colleague mentioned some, but let me cite 3 states again because it's so enormous and we've heard so much from them. Florida, 2 million, California, 2 million, Nevada, 390,000. They are still in distress. And everyone knows that the housing market has a lot to do with this economy. And even without the help of my good friends on the other side of the aisle, we still saw the unemployment go down and 192,000 jobs created. But I can tell you that this does nothing to create jobs. It simply puts Americans out on the street. It devastates families. And who knows, with the lack of sales of homes and remodification or modification of these, it puts people out of work, not in work. So I argue vigorously, a little too late, on the gentlelady's amendment, but I want to thank her for her astuteness, carefully defining what impact this bill would have. And it's unfortunate that the good work of FHA that requires documentation, a current job, a decent salary, and all that is needed is now thrown to the wolves with no other plan. And so we go home and constituents will ask us about modification or the viability of FHA, which has been in place for a long period of time. All we have to do is give them our empty hands and our blank face saying, obviously, greater minds than you who knew this was a good program decided to eliminate it with no substitute in place. So, Mr. Chairman, let me conclude by simply saying to the hundreds of thousands of borrowers, have faith, because this is only the first step. We know this is the wrong-headed and the wrong direction. Thank goodness for the Founding Fathers that gave us the House and the Senate and a President. And I can be assured that this legislation, I hope, is destined for a route of no return. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The Chair would remind the Gentlelady to direct her comment to the Chair and not the viewing public. The Clerk will designate Section 2.
Section 2, rescission of funding for FHA refinance program.
For purposes, the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule and printed in the Congressional Record, number 11.
The Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my colleague from Illinois, Mr. Dole, for introducing this legislation to end a failed federal program, the FHA refinance program. This amendment ensures that the savings realized from ending this program goes directly to debt reduction. Last month, Mr. Chairman, this chamber began a process of examining the federal budget line by line, asking tough questions and making tough decisions on federal spending. While our work was substantial, it is also continuing. In order to encourage economic growth and job creation, the federal debt is and must remain public enemy number one. Over the past 2 years, federal discretionary spending has increased by 24%. The rate of growth is simply unsustainable. Despite the record pace of new spending over the last 2 years, that spending continues today. And just this week, Mr. Chairman, we learned that the federal deficit for the month of February 2011 was the highest ever and exceeded the deficit for the entire fiscal year 2007, $233 billion, Mr. Chairman, the biggest monthly deficit in the history of our country. Over the past decade, we have seen the excesses and unsustainable growth in sectors of our economy that can have disastrous effects across the entire economy. Unless we take dramatic action now, the tax burden placed on small businesses and families in my own Bucks County and across the nation will outpace our ability to pay, killing jobs and straining family budgets. Just as troubling is the fact that the money our government is using to feed today's spending is being borrowed from future generations, much of it borrowed from foreign nations. The sheer amount of cash owned to foreign powers led the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Michael Mullen, last year to declare the deficit as the #1 security threat facing our nation. Reduce the debt. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment, support the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
I move to strike the last
Gentleman is
word.
recognized for 5 minutes.
First, I would repeat that I am glad to hear this support for Admiral Mullen. Earlier we heard of Secretary Gates and their warning about the deficit. I just wish that all of those who were accepting their warning on the deficit would refrain from forcing money on them that they don't want. We have people citing the military leadership and then voting for weapon systems, swelling an already swollen military budget that they don't want. As to this amendment, I am tempted to come to the defense of the drafters of the bill, because if you read the bill purports to do what the amendment purports to do. Apparently the author of the amendment didn't think the bill did a good enough job, or somebody thought the author of the amendment, being a nice fella, ought to get in on the credit. So this is an amendment that is either editorial refinement or political redundancy. In either case, it does not have much effect, so I urge the members to adopt it.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New York. For what purpose does she rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
I would just like to point out to Congressman Fitzpatrick from the great state of Pennsylvania that there are over 132,000 homes that are underwater now that could benefit from this program, and urge my colleagues to support the program. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Have it. The amendment is agreed to. The clerk will designate Section 3.
Section 3, termination of FHA refinance program.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I believe I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Lynch of Massachusetts.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to, first of all, clarify what this bill is intending to do. The goal of the bill by my colleagues is to end the FHA refinance program. And while I do support voluntary workouts, and I think that's the best way to approach the problem, I want to point out that the bill as it is written does not allow that to be accomplished by the FHA. Not only does the bill eliminate the targeted programs that they have identified, but it also, in its breadth, also eliminates the possibility of any voluntary agreements outside of these programs. And that's what my amendment would seek to address. I do know that the CQ's House Action Report indicated that I was amending Section 2. However, I want to make sure that they understand that the language of my amendment addresses Section 3, termination of FHA refinance program. Basically, what this amendment would do, to understand it, the FHA facilitates mortgage workouts and other actions under its purview through mortgage letters. These are written guidances to mortgagees, lenders, how to prove counselors and appraisers, and essentially anyone who is actively providing services on behalf or with the permission of HUD. Similar guidance is done for a lot of other programs. Administrative law dictates that the agencies can issue administrative guidance that interprets statutes and regulations that we adopt. And it requires public notice and comment and must be based on an authorizing statute. The FHA's guidance for lenders comes in the form of handbooks and these mortgage letters, which essentially provide periodic advice and clarification while we're trying to do these voluntary agreements. Last year, FHA issued 43 separate versions of this mortgage letter, and so far this year they've issued about 14. My amendment would strike the text that I believe and the FHA believes would interfere with the rest of the work that the FHA is doing in their operation. These are not areas targeted by the bill by the gentleman from Illinois. The bill provides that anything substantially similar to what they've prohibited in Section 2, which is a mortgage letter titled 2010-23, anything similar to that, any voluntary agreement similar to that would also be prohibited. That creates a problem. That stops the FHA from doing a lot of the other work that both sides agree needs to be done. We're talking about voluntary agreements where the bank and the servicer and the homeowner agree. Basically, that would be stopped by this legislation. So I'm not trying to undo the targeted work that you're trying to do. I'm just trying to let the FHA do their job in general. And I just want to remind the gentleman from Illinois that the FHA by itself cannot recreate the finance program through a mortgage letter. It can only it can only do so if it's legislation that's clearly underlying their action. And all the mortgage letters must go through departmental clearance and be viewed by OMB before they become official guidance. So I'm asking that this amendment be accepted to clarify the action of the bill itself. Thank you.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Continue to reserve.
The gentleman